Good evening all, and welcome to Hotel Le Petit Mort. I hope you enjoy your stay with us. We have a rather interesting collection of stories on tonight's menu, so be sure to dive in before you pass out. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. Several years ago, my father and I set out on a late evening drive to visit his parents in Atlanta, Georgia. The plan was straightforward: leave after his shift ended and arrive by midnight. However, the night unraveled differently. A series of jams pushed our ETA well past 3 a.m. By 11 p.m., my father made a pragmatic decision. We'd find a hotel for the night and let his parents sleep undisturbed. Unfortunately, we hadn't accounted for two major events converging in the city that weekend: a regional baseball tournament and the Atlanta furniture market. Every reputable hotel was fully booked, and as options dwindled, we found ourselves pulling into a weathered Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. Bars lined the lobby windows, several panes were cracked or shattered entirely. It looked like a place that had seen too many bad nights, but sleep-deprived and out of options, we rationalized it was still better than the cab of the truck. As we stepped into the vestibule, a garbled automated voice attempted to greet us from a rusted wall speaker. It was so distorted it sounded more like a malfunctioning alarm than a welcome. The lobby, in contrast, was deceptively tidy, and the man at the front desk appeared polite, if exhausted. He handed us a room key without hesitation. What happened next took seconds, but I've replayed those seconds for years. We reached our assigned room, and I slid the key card through the reader. A soft click. I pushed the door inwards only to find it bolted. The metal swing bar lock was engaged from the inside. I leaned into the small gap and peered through the dark crack of the doorway. A sudden blur of movement, and then a snarl. 3 American pit bulls lunged forward, jaws snapping, nails scraping against linoleum as they strained against the leash of that half-latched door. My blood iced over. Behind the dogs, under a flickering ceiling light, sat a man calmly cleaning a shotgun on the bedspread. His eyes flicked up and locked with mine. Before I could react, a second man appeared, muscle-bound, wide as a refrigerator, with arms like railroad ties. He stepped into the doorway holding a semi-automatic pistol so plainly visible that it might as well have been a handshake. "What do you want?" he said. I stammered something about having to check in and this was our room. He didn't move. "It ain't." We turned and walked fast. Back at the front desk, my father calmly requested a refund. The clerk didn't argue, just an exhausted, long sigh. "Someone was in your room, huh?" My dad nodded. The clerk muttered, "Not again," and handed our money back with trembling hands. No further explanation offered. We woke our grandparents up at nearly 4 a.m. They were more relieved than annoyed. We locked the doors, turned the lights off, and tried to forget what almost happened. But even years later, every time I walk into a hotel room, I pause before turning the handle, just to make sure it's actually mine. This started off as a dream trip. Summer 1986. Me and my friend Stacy were going to Hungary, somewhere we'd been dreaming of going for years, and we'd saved up for 2 years just to achieve it. 2 22-year-olds from Manchester, finally free of university, and with not a care in the world, we had planned 3 weeks across Eastern Europe and Budapest. That was meant to be one of the highlights. But the second we stepped into this hotel, if you could even call it that, I knew something was wrong. The lobby was dark and stained with years of cigarette smoke. The clerk barely looked up from his newspaper when we walked in, and when he did, his eyes crawled over us like he was stripping us bare. I caught Stacy's eye. She just smirked. "Bit of a character?" she whispered, nudging me. Character. That's what she always called dodgy situations. I didn't push it. We were tired and sunburned, and this was where we were going to be staying. The room itself wasn't much better. Peeling wallpaper in some places, a sagging mattress, and a window that wouldn't lock. I stood there staring at it while Stacy tossed her rucksack on the bed and flopped on it like it was the Ritz. "I think we're going to get murdered in our sleep," I said to her. "Grace, it's fine. It's going to be 2 days." She kicked off her shoes and sighed. That night we went out to explore the city. The Danube shimmered gold in the streetlights, and everything felt warm and alive. I will say that the nightlife in Hungary, at least when we went, was fantastic. We found a little cafe that served cheap wine and goulash, and for a while the sketchy hotel was a distant memory. But as we were exploring the city, I noticed something. A motorbike. I saw it parked near the cafe when we left, and then again when we turned on the main boulevard. 2 men sat on it, both black leather jackets with helmets and visors. The reason it was so discernible was the fact that they had painted or stuck something on it that looked green and purple. It caught my attention when I saw it, so not so inconspicuous, and I still remember it all these years later. They weren't doing anything, just idling, engine humming softly as if waiting, and the fact that I'd seen them twice concerned me, but Stacy didn't seem to notice. As we turned down the alley leading a hotel, I felt a little silly saying it. "I think these guys have been following us." And she laughed. "Who?" "The bike guys." "Oh, Grace, they're probably just doing their own thing." I told her that they'd been tailing us for about 6 blocks, and she told me to calm down. When I glanced back to see if they were still there, they were, far enough back not to be obvious, but when I turned the last corner they finally drove off. I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe I was overreacting. Back in the room, I made Stacy help me drag the dresser in front of the door. She laughed the entire time. "You want me to booby trap the window too?" I didn't like the feel of this place and I told her so, but she didn't object to us being safer rather than sorry. I had a hard time sleeping. Every creak, every gust of wind set my heart hammering. And at some point I dozed off, only to be jolted awake by a soft knock. It wasn't loud, it was careful, like whoever was doing it didn't want to wake the whole hallway. Then I heard a male voice, quiet and with a thick accent. But they were trying to make it sound female and doing a very bad job of it. "Housekeeping?" I sat bolt upright. It said 2:38 a.m. Stacy, half asleep, mumbled, "Who is it?" "Housekeeping," I whispered. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked down at the clock. "At 2:30 in the morning?" "Exactly." We both stared at the door. Another knock. "Housekeeping," the voice said, this time more insistent. "Don't." But Stacy was already getting up and muttering, "Maybe it's a mix-up, maybe someone's sick." I hissed, "Stacy, don't!" Too late. She unwedged the dresser just enough to crack open the door. The chain was still on, thank God. But the second she opened it, the chain snapped under the weight of a boot. A hand shot through and grabbed her by the arm, and she screamed. 2 men, the same ones from the motorbike, yanked the door open and dragged her into the hallway before I could even move. She kicked, scratched, and fought, but one of them cracked her across the temple and she went limp. I ran after them barefoot, screaming bloody murder through the corridors, but no one came. I passed 2 guests who literally turned their backs and ducked into their rooms. One staff member glanced up from behind the reception desk and then walked away without a word. They were halfway to the exit when I saw it. A beat-up grey vehicle waiting just outside the front door's engine running. I screamed while shoving past a woman who was indifferent to the whole thing. I caught up just as they were stuffing her into the back seat. I threw myself in front of the car, arms and legs shaking. I shrieked for them to let her go, but the driver revved the engine. The headlights washed over me, and I swear I saw the man behind the wheel give a slight nod to the other. They were going to run me over. But I didn't move, I couldn't. My knees were buckling, my stomach clenched. But I stood there like an idiot, a terrified idiot who didn't know what else to do. And then, the most blissful sound I'd ever heard. Sirens. Blue lights flooded the street. Tires screeched and someone yelled in Hungarian. The car doors flew open and the men ran, but the police were already there, and in seconds the two guys were on the ground, one of them screaming as the cop twisted his arm behind his back. Stacy was pulled from the back seat, dazed and bleeding from her lip, but otherwise fine. I collapsed in the middle of the road. It took hours at the station, translations, paperwork, statements, but by sunrise we finally received the whole story. The two men were part of a larger ring of traffickers. They were known for targeting foreign women staying in cheap hotels, taking them just before dawn and vanishing them into the countryside before anyone noticed. Their victims were rarely found. The detective, through a translator, managed to tell me that if they hadn't have sold her within a few days, then they most definitely would have killed her. I couldn't stop shaking, and neither could Stacy. We left hungry the next day. We hopped on the first train west and didn't speak for half the ride. We never finished that trip. Even now, I can't step into a hotel room without checking the locks a few times or hearing a soft knock at night without my heart freezing. Stacy and I never spoke about it much. Sometimes when we see each other, she'll grab my hand and squeeze it once tight, and I'll know what it means. I know I saved her life. But what keeps me up at night is knowing how close we came to being another story that never got old. And I find now as I'm getting older that the story keeps replaying in my head at night. And all the things that could have gone wrong that thankfully did not. I was on a cross-country road trip, and being the cheapskate adventurer I am, I thought it'd be funny to stay at the worst reviewed hotel I could find just for the experience. You know, for the story. I'd seen some TikToks about people doing it and surviving, and thought, hey, what can go wrong? So I googled worst hotels near me, and boom, top result was this absolute hellhole with 1.3 stars. I won't name it because I'm 95% sure the owners are in witness protection or running an underground fight club or something. The reviews were insane. One literally said, woke up to a gunshot sound, looked outside and there was a dead man in the parking lot, heroin needles in the bed bugs formed a society and bit me to hell. I wouldn't even take my life there. Naturally, I booked a night. When I pulled up, it already looked sketchy. Like if you've ever seen those motels in a horror movie that has a flickering neon sign and at least one broken down car permanently parked in front, this was that. The guy at the front desk looked like he hadn't slept since Obama was in office. I got my key, an actual key, not a card, and he kinda just mumbled, "Don't leave anything valuable in the car, or the room." Thanks. I opened the door to my room, and immediately got hit with that unmistakable smell. A mix of mildew, broken dreams, and despair. The bed had cigarette burns, the curtains were stained with something reddish-brown that I was praying was ketchup, and I swear I heard something scuttle under the bed. The only light bulb in the room was flickering like it was trying to send out an SOS, and I sat on the edge of the bed. Big mistake. And I felt a sharp prick. I looked down, and there was a needle just chilling there. I backed up fast, and that's when I saw the bugs. I'm not an entomologist, but those bed bugs looked like they had a hierarchy. Like, I think one of them might have saluted me. I noped out of there, and decided I'd rather sleep in my car. But then, as I'm heading back out, I hear this loud bang, like a gunshot. I duck, peek through the blinds, and there's a body. Just there, not moving. Cop cars rolled in 5 minutes later like they were already on speed dial. That was it. I drove off and spent the night in a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, sandwiched between two RVs that looked safer than the hotel. I took 3 showers the next morning and still itched. Moral of the story? Don't go chasing clout, or bedbug monarchies. We took a road trip to California to go to a wedding in Sonoma County. We had our nice condo booked, but they didn't have any availability in our first night. Everywhere was sold out, and we had to stay at a Motel 6. It was in a sketchy area, but we weren't too concerned. I mean, how bad could it be? We are on the ground floor and right by the front entrance, and can see out our window. Well, at around 2 a.m. we hear a van pull up. A group of guys exits and starts banging on the room next to ours. They get in her room, and that's when we hear a woman yelling for help. I felt helpless. We have a young child and my little sister and her boyfriend with us, and I reached for the phone. I was about to call 911 when my sister pointed out that there's a police car sitting out front by the van. The officer was just sitting in his car doing nothing. Honestly, I was too scared to call the police and get involved. I called the front desk to let them know what we heard, and they said they would take care of it. Next thing I know, those guys are knocking on our door and trying to look through our windows. I'm trying my hardest to keep my 2-year-old from crying, and I legit thought at that moment our life was going to end. Snitches end up in ditches, right? We stayed extremely quiet, and after a few minutes, they got back in the van and left with the woman. We didn't get any sleep that night. Next morning when I checked out, I told the front desk about what happened, and asked about the 24-hour security guy that was supposed to be on the grounds. They explained to me that he didn't see anything. I was told I didn't see or hear anything. We got out of there fast. I called the corporate office and they gave us a full refund. Clearly it didn't cover the emotional damages of that night though, and to this day I feel like a coward for not dialing 911. I don't know what happened to that poor woman, and I am sorry. Years ago, I went backpacking with my then girlfriend. We were exhausted, dehydrated, and a bit sick, and desperate for a bed. The travel guidebook mentioned a place in a dusty corner of this city called the Star Hotel. On paper, it sounded decent enough. They gave us a room that felt like a repurposed storage closet, cramped, filthy, and one wall stained in this dried, sticky red fluid. The bed was barely wide enough for one person and had the softness of a cinder block. Outside, trucks and scooters screamed by non-stop, belching black smoke through the cracked window. The stench of fuel hung in the air like fog. From the same window, the view was, well, apocalyptic. A junkyard with half-burned vehicles, dogfights over bones, and a group of sickly people gathered around an open fire. Inside the building, all you could hear was men hacking up their lungs, and deep guttural throat clearings echoing through the thin walls over and over again. Two things made it worse. I was deep in the middle of a nasty bout of food poisoning, with explosive diarrhea, cramps, dehydration, the whole ordeal. Oh, and a hip injury from slipping down some rocks the day before. So I was limping like a zombie, praying each step wouldn't trigger my guts. To get to the room, we had to walk through this open communal bathroom area, more like a tiled corridor really, full of shirtless men shaving and brushing their teeth, or just standing around and spitting into drains, and every single one of them stared at my girlfriend, not subtly and not kindly. They stared with this hungry, intrusive look that made both of us deeply uncomfortable. She begged me to find elsewhere. I said, screw it, let's catch a train out of this place together. The station was across the street, so the plan was to get tickets and come back and we'd be out of there. Now, crossing a street sounds simple enough, but this was a highway death trap style. No crosswalks, no traffic lights. I limped into battle against motorcycles, buses, and livestock trucks, all while trying not to defecate myself. Before I left, I made sure to tell her not to open the door for anyone but me. And what should have been no more than a 10-minute errand turned into a half-hour odyssey. I reached the train station drenched in sweat, stomach boiling like a volcano, and while in line, the pressure hit me. I was seconds from either passing out or unleashing hell in my shorts. But somehow, I got the tickets after a frustrating back and forth in broken English. Then came the dreaded road closing sign. Limping, swerving, and nearly getting clipped by a motorbike. I finally made it back, threw myself into the tiny bathroom and barely managed to get my pants down before everything inside me violently evacuated. I remember it so vividly. It was a mixture of pain and blessed relief. Whatever came out of me defied biology, and after cleaning it up, I went to the room and knocked our code phrase. She yanked the door open and pulled me inside, shaking and crying. While I'd been out, men had come to our door not once but several times, knocking, calling her pretty, and trying to twist the doorknob, whispering filthy things through the crack in the door. At one point they were actually rattling it, pushing against it, and she'd hidden in the bathroom frozen in fear. She told me she'd never felt as scared in her life, like an animal in a cage, waiting for slaughter. We fled, grabbed our bags and sprinted out of there, caught the first train out of town, and found a clean little guest house run by an old couple who gave us tea and extra blankets. We tried to forget about the experience after that night. Back in 2007, I went to California with my now ex-wife. We stayed for 11 days at a Best Western hotel in Los Angeles. We had a great time. Each day we would return to the hotel, go to the pool, and then have some good time in our room. After about 3 or 4 days, we're coming back to the hotel and see a new couple is now in the room next to ours. No big deal. We say hello and go back to our room. Later that night, we hear a lot of noise coming from outside. I get up and watch through the window as I see the guy who had just taken the room next to us yelling like crazy. The guy was returning from the nightclub just outside the hotel. Must have had a bad night with his partner. I was still naked at the time, so I didn't open the door and just got back to bed, watching some TV. Time flies, and about half hour later, I hear a huge noise coming from near my room's door. I get up again, and now the guy is back outside yelling, and he has a fire extinguisher in his hand. The noise I heard is this guy slamming the fire extinguisher against the vending machine. He literally destroyed it. Things right now were starting to be less funny. The thing about me is that I come from the small country of Switzerland. I've never been robbed, assaulted, or anything. I could leave my house open for days and no one would even come in to steal anything, and now I'm 10,000 kilometers from home, and a guy is ruining this hotel experience for me. But it gets worse. He starts slamming the fire extinguisher on our door and starts to yell that if we don't open the door, he will end our lives. And I'm behind the door, naked, and barely know what to say. I stayed there for 5 minutes trying to figure out what to do, and then I said something along the lines of, "Who are you? We didn't do anything." The guy was so upset he continued without listening. I got back to bed petrified, and then the guy decided it would be cool to throw the fire extinguisher in the hotel's pool and go back to kick some ass at the nightclub. The story could have ended there, but instead, half hour after that, I heard the local police come with about 3 cars. I got back up, just behind the door of my room, looking through the tiny hole that used to see who's ringing the door, and behind it, I see the same guy, his girlfriend, and 5 police officers. The guy's been handcuffed and is now being questioned in front of me. And here's the story. The guy and his girlfriend went to dinner, got pretty drunk, and decided to go to the nightclub near the hotel. Things were pretty good up until that point, where the girl started to get so drunk that she was flirting with every guy in the club. The boyfriend, understandably, got upset, and they began yelling at each other in the club. Club security got a bit upset with the guy and threw him out, letting the girl stay, saying the guy could come back later when he was over the yelling. The guy came back to the hotel, and for some reason, probably alcohol, started to think his girlfriend was in their room. That was the first step. When I heard the guy yell all over the hotel, naturally he hadn't had the room's door key, he came back to the nightclub. But then, security wouldn't let him back in, and he got so upset he decided to get a fire extinguisher and ruin everything in the hotel for his girlfriend. Except, of course, he couldn't access the room. The thing is, he was so drunk, he thought his room was our room. He thought his girlfriend was in our room. And don't forget, the girlfriend was neither in our room or theirs, she was still at the club. This is why he kept yelling at us, and when he was trying to open the door with a fire extinguisher. The hotel lobby then finally proceeded to call the police. The next day we woke up to a completely destroyed vending machine, a fire extinguisher in the pool, and a room door completely smashed in, and the hotel manager giving us 2 days of free stay. About 28 years ago, I was traveling through Southeast Asia. I was in northern Malaysia, heading for the eastern islands of southern Thailand. Because I was lazy, I slept in and only caught a ride into Thailand in the evening. I arrived in the border town close to midnight, and as per the way I traveled at that time, had no place booked. I usually stayed in guest houses, which sometimes were as simple as an extra room in someone's home. The only place in the Lonely Planet guide for the town were locked up for the night. I had befriended this English couple on the bus, but they were just planning to hang out all night in the street. It was already past midnight, and the ferry to the island was really early, so for every hour that passed, the value of the hotel diminished. Finally, I decided there was no way I'd hang out in the street in this foreign town for the rest of the night, so I asked a taxi driver for a hotel. Any hotel. He took me to one which looked okay. My standards were pretty low. When I went to the front desk, more like a booth, the unimpressed attendant informed me that the room was 140 baht for the night. That was almost 3 times what I was used to paying. This had better be a good hotel, I thought to myself as I started up the stairs. At the top of the first flight, I came face to face with an extremely drunk Thai man. He was very friendly and smiling, but absolutely wasted. Probably not a great hotel, I thought, as I continued to my room. Like the many guest houses of the time, there was a chicken wire at the top foot of the wall of the room. You could pretty much hear everything around you. The room itself seemed clean, but the bed had no mosquito net. This was bad, because you can get in a mosquito net and it will protect you from mosquito-borne malaria and other assorted creepy crawlies. Then I went into the bathroom, where they had this small reservoir of water, so mosquitoes were assured. Finally, I went to bed. I had sheets sewn into a sleeping bag, a great trick for traveling to hot, dodgy places, and covered my whole body except my mouth and nose. Pretty soon after closing my eyes, a loud argument started between a Thai man and woman. They were shouting at each other. I could only guess what they were saying. As the argument went on, I started to hear moaning from another room that was increasing to its inevitable crescendo. It finally dawned on me that I was staying in a brothel. So for the rest of the night, I was serenaded with some interesting cries. I managed to sleep a few hours only to wake up to 8 mosquito bites around my nose and mouth, the only exposed part of my body. I left, and as you can imagine, never returned. Please, book your stays in advance. When I was 24 years old, I think I accidentally lived through a horror story, not the kind you'd hear around a campfire. I had been studying abroad in a city called Lumberg and decided to take a short solo trip up to Nordvig, Norway. The plan was simple: see the aurora, stay a few nights in a cheap hostel, and head back. What I didn't know was this hostel wasn't really a hostel at all. I arrived late at night. The place turned out to be some guy's actual house. He'd converted 2 attic rooms into dorms and was renting out the beds. I guess that's legal. I don't know. He met me at the door and walked me upstairs, where he pointed to a bed that was, no exaggeration, 30 centimeters from another one. Someone was already sleeping in it. There were no lockers, no curtains, and no privacy. But okay, fine. I had a bag lock. Then came the house rules. Because I arrived after 9 p.m, I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. Apparently his family gets disturbed if people flush the toilet or run water after a certain hour. It was already too late to argue, so I quietly snuck into the little bathroom, brushed my teeth in the sink, used the toilet and crawled into bed. For context, there was only 1 toilet allowed for guest use, and the place had to be close to 20 beds. The next morning I managed to take a very sad cold shower. He had a rule against shaving too. He said he thought it was unhygienic. But despite everything, Nordvik itself was gorgeous. I had a Northern Lights tour booked for that evening and didn't disappoint. But when I got back around 6 p.m. to change into ski gear, I noticed something weird. My stuff had been moved. The man came upstairs totally unfazed and told me that someone had requested my bed, so I would be sleeping elsewhere. No warning, no apology, just moved. Fine, creepy but fine. I still had 2 nights left. The Northern Lights were incredible, and I didn't get back until 3 a.m. I was freezing. I wanted nothing more than a hot shower, but nope, locked door. He had literally locked the bathroom, the toilet, and even the sink, and I had to go to bed cold and dirty. By now I was counting the hours until I could leave. The next night I came back early enough to use the toilet before bed, knowing my flight was early next morning, and I wouldn't get another chance. And then I woke up. The room was still dark and everyone else was asleep. But I felt it right away. Something was wrong. I had gotten my period. I sat up hoping, really hoping it wasn't bad, but when I looked down, there it was. A red stain in the bed. And not just the sheets, it had soaked through the mattress. The guy didn't even use mattress protectors. Of course. There was no private place to change, so I had to put a pad under the covers in bed, hoping no one noticed. I couldn't wash my hands before or after, and I felt disgusted. I grabbed my things, got dressed next to the front door, and bolted. I didn't look back. I half expected an angry message from the owner later, but nothing. I never heard from him again. I just really hope he cleaned that bed before the next guest. And if you're out there, and you ended up in a blood-stained mattress in a creepy attic hostel in Norway, I am so sorry. I used to work the graveyard shift as a night auditor at this hotel, and though most nights blurred together into routine paperwork and the occasional weird guest, there's one night I'll never forget. A night that shook me more than I care to admit. It started off like any other. I was buried in reports from the sales department, half focused, half counting the minutes until sunrise, when a man approached the front desk. He looked completely ordinary, calm and polite, and asked if there was a gas station within walking distance. I gave him directions, nothing unusual, and he nodded, thanked me, and walked into the night. I thought nothing more of it. Roughly 20 minutes later, a woman bursts into the lobby, frantic, breathless, and eyes wide in panic. She rushed to the desk and asked if I'd seen her son. As she described him, my stomach dropped. It was the same man, same build, same clothes, same face. She was shaking as she told me he had just called her, said he'd gotten into a fight with his girlfriend, and now he was going to take his own life, and he was heading for the freeway overpass nearby. Before I could even process what she said, the man reappeared, silent this time. He didn't even glance in my direction, just walked past the desk and tossed his room key onto the counter like it meant nothing. I hadn't seen him come in, he must have come in using the side entrance, and he was carrying all his belongings. No words, no eye contact. I checked his reservation info, no phone number, no emergency contact, nothing. The room was paid in cash, clean record, or at least on paper. 10 minutes later, the police show up. His mother had called them in full panic mode, and now I was caught in the storm. While trying to check in guests out at 6 a.m., still far from finishing this night reports, I had to keep explaining to the same officer 3 times that I didn't know the man, had no way to contact him, and had only spoken to him once. He was so composed when he asked for directions, and that's what got to me. No tears, no anger, no signs at all. Oh, and one more thing. He trashed his room, ripped curtains, broken lamps, shattered mirror, like a hurricane had passed through. And yet he stood in front of me, and you'd never have guessed a thing. I don't actually know what happened to him, if they managed to apprehend him before he did take his life, or not. It's one thing that I've been left wondering for all these years. A while ago, I was in Kansas City on business. I'd been there a few times, so I was getting pretty used to the town. After my last night in Kansas City, I'd never want to go back again. It was a little after 10, and I was feeling a bit tipsy when I got back to the nearby hotel. In my less than sober state, I decided that I needed to put on my complimentary water on ice for the morning. Barefoot, I put on my Super Mario-themed pajama pants, not expecting to have to wear them outside the hotel room. Whatever. No one I know is in Kansas City. I wedged the lock on the door to keep it open and walked to the ice machine down the hall. Out of order, okay. I take the elevator to the next floor and get ice there. I press the button to take me up to the top floor. There's no way that the concierge level would have a broken ice machine, and immediately, all I hear coming from the elevator shaft was a man hollering and screaming and shouting. My first instinct was that it was some kids horsing around on the elevator. But what if I was wrong? I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side, so I decided I would drink my water warm. I walked back to the room, and I thought that would be where the story ended. But I would find out who was in the elevator the next night. My colleague Pete and I were in line for the jetway to head back to Boston the day after the ice machine elevator incident, and Pete asks me if I heard about the police at the hotel the previous night, and I asked him if it was a little after 10, and that's when he relayed the story. Pete was in the hotel bar doing some work when a group of girls in still wet bathing suits came out of the elevator and headed into a corner of the lobby. One of the women working the front desk went over to the girls and then rushed to the desk and made a phone call. 2 minutes later, the police arrived, and 5 minutes later the paddy wagon pulled up. Then Pete heard the same shouting I had run from the night before. The elevator doors opened, and police emerged dragging a bare-ass naked man. They brought him through the lobby, naked and shouting the whole way until they got outside and into the paddy wagon. They spoke to the manager and asked what the heck it was all about. She told him the naked man was going from floor to floor with a knife, hopped up on God knows what. He reached the pool and the girls got away. I don't know to what would have happened had I left my hotel room a few minutes earlier. Moral of the story, use the refrigerator in your room to chill your water. This didn't happen to me, but I was there when it went down. Back in June of 2010, I was in New Orleans for my brother's bachelor party. There were about 20 of us total, all spread out across different hotels, but 4 of us, including me, were staying at the Vieux Carré Hotel downtown. Now, one of the guys on the trip called Carl was staying by himself at the Old Belle Maison on Canal Street. At some point, he heads back to his room alone to grab something. As he's walking down the hallway, 2 women come sprinting towards him, yelling for help. They're saying something about their boyfriend attacking them and asking if they can use his phone. Now, Carl, bless his heart, thinks he's God's gift to women. He's not a bad-looking dude, but he definitely plays the numbers game, if you catch my drift. So of course he lets them into his room. Big mistake. The moment they step in, one of them yanks the phone out the wall, and the other one pulls a knife and blocks the door. Carl isn't exactly built for confrontation at maybe 5'6", and 130 soaking wet, so he freezes. They tell him to open the safe and hand over his money and passports, and he does, obviously. Meanwhile, back at the party, we're wondering where the hell Carl is. We tried calling and texting to no reply. Hours pass. His roommate is missing too. A few of the guys walk over to the Belle Maison, knock on the door and nothing. Cleaning lady is there making the beds and the room's empty. They ask the front desk if they've seen him, but of course they can't give out info unless you can prove you actually know the guy. Eventually, Carl finds us and tells the whole story. Now, knowing Carl, we all kind of side-eye him because he's one of those guys who could talk his way out or into anything. But this time it checks out. Turns out as soon as the women left, he called the front desk. Security came up, got a description, ran down to the casino floor, and boom, they were still there hanging out like nothing had happened. Security got his stuff back, passports and all. Hotel even upgraded him and his room to a suite as a sorry for the trauma gesture. If it had happened to literally anyone else on the trip, we would have freaked out. But with Carl, we still joke about it to this day. We were passing through rural New Mexico on the way to California with my newborn and significant other. Just before the time when everyone had smartphones, we were young, broke, and exhausted. So we pulled into the first place with an accessible parking lot big enough for the U-Haul. The place was called Sunset Rest Inn. The name alone should have been a red flag. I walked up to the front desk and asked how much the room was. The woman behind the counter told me it was $50 a night, and after a long day of driving, that sounded fair enough. And I said, "I'll take the room." She paused, looked at me and asked, "Are you sure?" with a confused expression. This should have been my second warning. She handed me the key and suggested I go check the room out before committing. The room looked normal at first. 2 beds, a TV, a table with some chairs, nothing fancy, but we only needed it for the night. I went back and paid her. Later we walked around to the nearby area for a bit and came back to the room to settle in. I pulled back the comforter on one of the beds and a massive cockroach-like bug started flying around the room. I quickly threw the blanket back over the bed and decided just to sleep on top of it. When I sat down, I realized the bed didn't even have a proper mattress. It felt like plywood with maybe a thin layer of foam. As we looked around more, we started finding trash hidden in odd places throughout the room, like someone had tried to clean it in a hurry and just stuffed things where they could. My partner could sleep anywhere, so she was out in no time, as was my newborn in his portable bed. But I couldn't sleep at all. A few weeks later, I was watching CSI, and to my horror, the same motel showed up at a crime scene in one of the episodes. They were even mocking how awful it was. When I was about 10, my parents took me on a weekend trip, and we stayed in one of these budget motels just off the highway. Nothing fancy, just 2 beds, a tiny bathroom, and faded wallpaper. But the room had one of those doors, a locked door in the wall that connects to the room next to yours. Only useful if you're traveling with friends or family and you've booked both rooms, otherwise it stays shut. 2 doors, one on each side, which you both need to unlock in order to pass through. The thing is, no one should have been on the other side of that door. We settled in for the night exhausted from a long day of driving, and I was dozing off when I heard a tapping on the door. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe pipes, maybe something outside. But my parents heard it too. Another knock. Always 3. Always quiet enough to make you strain your ears. I remember looking over at my mum. Her eyes were wide, staring at the door like it might open at any moment. My dad sat up tense but didn't move, and no one said anything for a while. The knocking continued for minutes, then stretched into hours. Never loud, never urgent, just persistent. Like someone on the other side didn't just want to come in, they wanted us to know they were there. My dad considered pounding back, he really did. I could see in his face anger starting to boil over into fear. But he didn't. Neither of them went to the front office. Neither of them called the front desk. We just sat there paralyzed, listening. I think that's what gets me now. As a kid, I don't remember being terrified. I was confused and tired. But my parents, they were afraid. And looking back as an adult, if your parents are scared, you probably should be too. Eventually the knocking stopped. At some point I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up it was morning, and the sun was pouring in like nothing ever happened. We didn't talk about it much after that, just packed up and left like normal. But sometimes late at night I think about that door, about whoever was on the other side standing there in the dark, and I wonder if they were knocking for help or waiting for one of us to open it. I worked at a hotel in Florida, a fairly upscale one. One day after a particularly bad string of thunderstorms, I went to clean the pool. They had an actual pool guy they called from time to time, but only when the pool was really bad. When I first looked at the pool, I brought the manager outside and told him I felt like it was out of my scope. The pool was covered in debris, leaves, plants, mulch, and dirt. He told me he thought I could handle it, so I was like, whatever, guess I'm scooping this thing out with a net all day. So I start scooping, probably have been scooping for an hour or so, when this girl comes to the pool and asks if it's swimmable. I look at her with a face that implies that she must be joking, and I ask if she really wants to swim in that. She kind of shrugged and decided to lie down in a sun chair till I was finished scooping the pool out, which is fine by me. We started making small talk, and finally she tells me she just wanted to dip her legs in. She does so, and after about 10 to 15 minutes, I notice some weird-looking things swimming around the pool. And they're coming for her feet. I yell at her to get out now, and she looks at me like I'm crazy, but she leaves. I point, and she looks down, and there are about 10 to 12 of these large, weird water beetles, toe biters or giant water bugs. They are now gathering near the wall where she was soaking her feet. She freaked out hard and ran off, understandably so, and I assumed went back to her room to have a nervous breakdown. I went and got the manager and told him to either call the pool guy or do it himself, because I wasn't working with these monsters. He actually opened one of the pool filters and came across about 15 or more of them. It was a sight you don't unsee easily. My girlfriend and I went to a concert in a small city out east last summer. When we were booking our trip, we called just about every hotel in town and couldn't find a single available room. Finally, we got lucky, or so we thought. We found one vacancy at a rundown little motel on the outskirts. Relieved, we booked it immediately. As soon as we landed, our cab driver gave us a look when we mentioned the name of the place. "That's where you're staying?" he asked, already shaking his head. Then came the warnings. He told us it was rough, and man, he wasn't wrong. The motel looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. There was a massive dark stain on the carpet, definitely something that used to be red. Flies everywhere. And most of the other guests seemed to be checking in for very short stays. The whole place was run by a jittery guy called Mike, who lived there with 5 women that definitely weren't just roommates. We were uneasy but tried to brush it off, until Saturday afternoon rolled around. We came back at around 3 p.m. and walked right into a very awkward scene. One of the women was busy with a client in the front seat of an SUV, parked right in front of the front door in the middle of the day. No effort to hide it, like it was just part of the room service. From then on, we slept fully clothed on top of the covers. It didn't feel like anything in that room had been washed in a long time. To top it off, we found out that someone had actually passed away in that same room, burnt to death a few years earlier. There's even a video of it online. The guy who pulled him out? Yeah, it was Mike, the owner. He told us the whole story like it was a claim to fame, said he even got a medal for it. The way he told it, it involved drugs, a pimp, a fire, and chaos. So, yeah, if you ever find yourself in a place called the Lakeside Inn in some random small town, keep driving. Every year around Halloween, my friend Betty and a friend of hers embark on a road trip to explore haunted locations. These trips are usually extensive and can take a few days to reach their destination. One year, while traveling through a desolate area outside of coastal Texas, they decide to stay at a small, old motel for the night. Exhausted from their journey, they checked in, quickly prepared for bed, and fell asleep. During the night, Betty was awoken by the sound of the door unlocking. Assuming it was her friend retrieving something from the car, she closed her eyes and tried to go back to sleep. However, the noise escalated, and when she opened her eyes, the door was slightly ajar, with a man's arm reaching inside. Betty immediately jumped up and threw her full weight against the door to close it. She and her friend called the police, who took some time to arrive. The officers interviewed the woman, and when questioned the front desk clerk, the clerk appeared suspicious and was holding his arms strangely. However, due to the lack of cameras and witnesses, the police couldn't charge him. Betty couldn't clearly identify him either. Shaken by the experience, the women decided to leave immediately. With the police present, they packed their bags and continued their road trip, feeling less enthusiastic about their haunted destination. It was supposed to be just a place to sleep. One night in a Super 8 off the highway in Florida. We were driving through late and were really tired. The sun was going down, it was hot, and we just wanted a clean bed to crash in. But instead, we got a room that felt like it had been hastily scrubbed after something terrible had happened. Because the moment we opened the door, the smell hit us sharp and chemically. It's the kind of smell that sticks in your throat and makes your eyes water. Bleach, maybe even something stronger, like whatever they were cleaning with was soaked deep into the walls. Industrial smelling stuff. There were 2 beds, both with rusting, crinkling plastic covers over the mattresses. To us, it felt like something you might find in a hospital or a crime scene. The coat hangers in the closet were snapped in half, some of them bent into unnatural angles. And the back of the TV was cracked wide open, with wads of torn paper stuffed into it to keep it from sagging. When we looked behind it, the wall was smeared with faint, greasy stains. The evacuation map of the back door was missing, just 4 corners of tape where it used to be. My dad went to the front desk furious. I stayed behind in the room. Maybe I was too tired, or perhaps I was just curious. After almost an hour of arguing with the front desk clerk, some wiry guy with a crooked smile and deeply forced politeness, we were given the room next door. At least this one didn't smell like bleach-soaked death. The plastic covers were gone and nothing was visibly broken, but the metal security latch on the inside of the door, the one that keeps someone from kicking the door in even if they have a key, was torn clean off. Just 2 sheared bolts and a jagged outline where it had once been. We were too tired to drive again, too unsettled to sleep. We jammed a chair under the doorknob and took turns dozing with one eye open. Every sound outside, the creak of a floorboard, the groan of the ice machine, the hum of plumbing, frightened me. No one tried to get in that night, but the fear never left the room. It felt like we were being watched. We left at dawn, not even a goodbye at the desk. It wasn't until the next day after we'd shaken the worst off that everything finally clicked. The room we were first given, it hadn't been meant for guests. That wasn't a room that people stayed in. That was the clean-up room, the cover-up room. My dad overheard something the next morning while checking his credit card. The motel had been under investigation just a few months earlier. A transient woman had been found dead, maybe drugs, maybe worse. They never said. She was discovered some days after her death, when the next guest complained about the smell. In the heat, the body had begun to leak into the mattress, and stains had soaked through to the subfloor. They never bothered to replace it. They just doused it in chemicals and put a new sheet over it. And that's where they put us. On purpose, because the guy at the desk didn't like how we talked, didn't like that we were tourists. Probably. Who knows, really? He gave us the murder room, and when we complained, he put us 1 door down. This happened in the mid-2000s, way before rating portals were a thing. I was staying at a cheap hotel in Hamburg, Germany. Unbeknownst to me, basically across the street was/is Rote Flora, a theatre that's been squatted by anarchists and extremists since the 1990s. The night before, the people that lived there had beaten up a guy they believed to be a skinhead, nearly taking his life. The night I was in the area, police rolled in to apprehend a couple of suspects within earshot of Rote Flora. The whole scene was deteriorating into a minor riot very quickly. At 1 a.m., some of the squatters broke into the hostel and burst into our room, among others. Maybe they just wanted to hide there, but I suspect they prepared to hurl stuff at their pursuers through the windows. I had a tough time convincing them to leave us the heck alone. Luckily, someone had already alerted the police, and when the sound of sirens became deafening, those wannabe revolutionaries just skedaddled. Throughout the whole experience, the hotel's owner remained surprisingly apathetic. When I asked him why it wasn't him who'd called the cops, he basically said, "I have to live here." I guess I know what he meant. I was living in Hawaii for a bit, staying with a friend, a kind of short notice deal, and I had to find a place to stay for a week. I was able to find a nice hostel for 6 of the 7 days I needed, but the first night I had to find somewhere else. Well, there was a terrible hostel literally right next door, and I thought, I can handle one night. I've stayed in a ton of crappy hostels, and God was I wrong. It was basically a homeless shelter filled with hoarders and people with drug problems. I checked in at a fold-open table in the parking lot, and the lady didn't seem to be there either. I got the key and started walking up. There were pretty rough-looking people getting drunk on the walkways and hordes of crap piled up. I get to my dorm room, which wasn't any better. Only one bunk that didn't have piles of crap on it, so I guess that was mine. I looked at the kitchen, and it looked like it hadn't been truly cleaned in years. I walked into the bathroom, and there were a lot of cockroaches and grime everywhere. My jaw dropped. I decided to grab my valuables out of my backpack, leave it on the bed, and go out and stay at a bar as late as possible. I get back at 2:30 in the morning, curl into the fetal position on the bed with my head on my backpack just to get a few hours of sleep. Then, once sunrise arrived, I got the hell out of there and nursed my hangover on the beach until I got with my friends. In retrospect, I should have just slept there. It would have been cleaner and less dangerous. I was on the way back from New York with my dad at the time, and since it was already getting late when we left, my dad booked a cheap hotel. I think it was a Motel 6 in Pennsylvania. I don't think we were in Gettysburg, but it was a small town close, since we were already strapped on cash and needed the leftover money for gas and to make it back to Michigan. We booked a non-smoking room, but the first thing we noticed is all of the floors had smokers smoking in it. At first it wasn't that bad, but once we got into our room, that's when the horror unfolded. The ceiling was yellow from cigarette tar, and there were cigarette butts all around the bed, and the smoke was so thick in the room I could gag on it. I have mild asthma that rarely forces me to use an inhaler, and most of the time things don't bother my lungs. I used my inhaler for the first time in months that night. My dad couldn't take it, and he tried to open the window for some fresh air. He pushed the bed towards the window, and when the bed was pulled away from the wall, I saw dead roaches and a used needle surrounded by cigarette butts. It looked like the roaches were performing a ritual with the needle and cigarette ends. Unfortunately, the hotel was situated on a swampy/marsh type of land, so when my dad got the window open, the fresh air that was now wafting into our room was putrid smelling. It smelled like a mixture of sewer and decomposition from dead animals and rotting plant matter. All of that mixed with the smoke, and at that point I tapped out. We ended up leaving the hotel and sleeping in our car at a gas station parking lot. There was a small diner that we went to the next morning that seriously had the best food and coffee. I don't remember the name of it. It was right by the highway that would lead to Gettysburg from the town we were in, and the waitresses all wore this outfit that had blue and white patterns on it. That looked like those pictures of the 50s housewives. If anyone is around that area, I'd like to know what that place is called so I can go back there someday, but never to stay a night in that place. I went on a school trip, and I was sharing a very small room with only one twin bed for 4 high school kids. Co-ed as well, which ended up being fine. Just very uncomfortable for everyone. But in the middle of the night around 3 a.m., our singular window was shattered by a fist-sized rock that landed at the end of the bed. I was on the floor immediately, rolled under the bed to hide. I found that the carpet changed in textures and smells. It smelled like metal and urine. One of the guys who was sleeping on the floor as well stood up and looked out the now broken window and saw someone in a white hoodie and no pants running away with a rock in his hand. We didn't go back to bed. Instead, we all sat up against the wall, talking and trying to distract ourselves from the fact that a half-naked person just shattered our window. In the morning, when lights came through the hole in the wall, I saw that the stain under the bed was most likely blood and urine. I would be lying if I told you that I didn't immediately start stripping and running for the nasty shower. I would also be lying if I told you that I wasn't crying. I laughed with my friend about this now, figuring that the guy was probably on drugs and didn't mean to break the window, so they got scared and ran away. But the blood thing still haunts me though. We ended up having to pay $50 in property damage for the window, even though we didn't break it, and it probably wasn't worth $50 anyway. I've come to realize through my 2 years as a night auditor that the things that shake you the most are not the weird noises you hear or the overwhelming feelings of loneliness at 3 a.m. The stuff that really gets to you simply being things that your guests do. There have been a few good incidences that have shaken me a bit over my tenure, like an intoxicated man waving his gun around at 3 a.m., a woman having a schizophrenic breakdown in a room and having a violent dispute with herself, and a man wandering the halls talking to himself for hours on end. I can remember one though that struck me as extremely odd, which I'm going to share with you now. One night, a few hours after I had arrived for my shift, a guest kept coming down and aimlessly wandering around the lobby and breakfast area. He was doing extremely odd things, like talking to himself and sitting down at a breakfast table only to stand up and switch chairs at the same table every 2 to 3 minutes. Every time I asked him if he needed help, he would jerk a little and mumble that he didn't need anything. Well, a few hours or so after he finally went to his room, he came back down and said he had turned the heater on, and it made him short of breath and needed me to call an ambulance. So even though I was confused, I obliged. About a minute later, the hotel's fire alarm started going off. The whole time the firemen were going up and down from his room and they kept asking if anyone was with him or if he was alone. And I kept telling them that he was in fact alone and that there should be no other guests in that room. After the firemen left and everything went back to normal, I went to look in the man's room. He had rearranged all the furniture and put the TV in the bathroom and had put his trash can in the middle of the room and set it on fire. The thing that troubled me wasn't the fact that the man intentionally set his room on fire and could have possibly burnt the hotel down. It was the fact that even though he was alone, he had small children's clothes spread around the room. This place was encountered while doing some university research in rural Alberta. Working on grants, obviously we weren't always going to be staying in the greatest hotels. So first off the bat, we noticed that the hotel was attached to a stripper bar. Okay. Walking into the lobby, the walls and the hallways were yellow and old from tar and cigarettes, and the smell hung heavy in the air. I could feel my mood sink as we walked to our rooms. Both my roommate and myself noticed cigarette burn holes all over the blankets. It was also super cold in there. We got the manager who ignored the blankets, but turned on the heater in the room. This heater sounded like a bicycle with an off-kilter chain whenever we turned it on, which was every hour. Other features of the room included the TV that had white stains all over it and grimy brown towels. We went to our boss and told him about how crappy our room was, and he said we were staying for a week and that we would just have to get used to it. A pretty sleepless night on top of the covers with the noisy heater going off every hour led to a knock on the door in early morning. It was my boss, informing us that we were going to change hotels. I asked him what on earth changed his mind. Apparently, the exposed electrical wires in his shower. Bonus, we ate at the restaurant there. We ordered nachos and beer. The nachos came out completely black. Our waitress was super annoyed when we asked for less burnt nachos, saying that they looked fine and that she would totally eat them. Leaving so soon? Thank you so much for your stay at Hotel Mort. We hope you've had a pleasant experience. Don't forget to write all your thoughts and comments in the guest book down below to help improve for our next customers. We do very much so value your patronage, and have you heard of our rewards program? You can follow the links in the description to find out more for some exclusive gifts and perks for your next stay. I would also like to take a moment to thank all our Reward Club members whose names can be seen on screen. But that's it from me. Until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.